United States and Canada have been hit by a powerful atmospheric river, which is a long, narrow band of water vapor that forms over the ocean and transports enormous amounts of moisture. When that moisture makes landfall, it releases intense, prolonged rainfall that can trigger major flooding, which will show entire neighborhoods flooded with homes, farmland and roads completely inundated. Officials say an atmospheric river has dumped relentless rain over the region, pushing rivers to dangerous levels and ravaging the ground. The storm has unleashed between 5 and 10 inches of rain across large areas of the Pacific Northwest. In fact, in some locations along the western slopes of the Cascade Mountains, rainfall over the past 72 hours has exceeded 1 foot. In Washington, more than 100,000 residents have been forced to evacuate due to the flooding.
Let me just give you an update on our request. The state has a request for a declaration of emergency from the federal government. After my press conference yesterday afternoon, I had a call with them with FEMA, I believe, at 2 o'clock yesterday afternoon. We had a good conversation with General Welsh and others to describe in detail the situation here in Washington State and really the tremendous need that Washington State has for assistance from the federal government.
State of emergency in the state of Washington. Tens of thousands of people on the west side of the state under evacuation orders following days of heavy rain up there. This is major flooding on at least 8 rivers and creeks. It's prompting road closures, school closures, and water rescues. Governor Bob Ferguson calls the situation unpredictable.
Severe flooding across large parts of the United States and Canada has triggered mass evacuations, crippled transportation networks, and forced emergency officials to issue urgent warnings as rivers surged beyond safe levels. From the Midwest and Northeast in the U.S. to provinces across central and eastern Canada, communities are grappling with rising waters that have overwhelmed infrastructure, displaced thousands, and raised new concerns about the growing frequency of extreme weather events. The flooding unfolded after days of persistent heavy rainfall combined with rapid snowmelt in higher elevations, saturating soil and pushing rivers, creeks, and reservoirs to dangerous levels. In many regions, ground conditions were already weakened from earlier storms, leaving little capacity to absorb additional water. As a result, rivers burst their banks with alarming speed, inundating neighborhoods, farmland, and critical transport corridors. Emergency authorities in multiple states and provinces declared states of emergency as floodwaters advanced. Residents in low-lying areas were ordered to evacuate, sometimes with only minutes' notice. In some towns, evacuation routes themselves became submerged, forcing rescue crews to use boats and high-water vehicles to reach stranded families. In the United States, the flooding affected several regions simultaneously. In the Midwest, swollen rivers inundated agricultural land and small towns, cutting off access to major highways and rural roads. Local officials reported washed-out bridges, collapsed culverts, and widespread power outages as substations and transmission lines were threatened by floodwaters. In the Northeast, intense rainfall caused flash flooding in urban and suburban areas where drainage systems were quickly overwhelmed. Streets turned into rivers, trapping vehicles and forcing emergency responders to conduct water rescues. Public transportation systems experienced widespread disruptions as subway stations, bus routes, and commuter rail lines were temporarily shut down due to flooding and safety concerns. The southern United States also faced severe impacts, particularly in river basins already running high from seasonal rainfall. Levees and floodwalls were placed under heavy strain, prompting authorities to monitor structural integrity around the clock. In some cases, controlled releases from reservoirs were carried out to prevent catastrophic failures, adding further water downstream and compounding flood risks. Across the border in Canada, provinces including Ontario, Quebec, Manitoba, and parts of Atlantic Canada experienced similar challenges. Spring thaw combined with prolonged rainfall pushed major rivers to levels not seen in years. Floodwaters encroached on residential areas, forcing evacuations in both urban centres and rural communities. In Ontario, rivers feeding into the Great Lakes system surged, flooding homes and cottages along shorelines and tributaries. Emergency shelters were set up to accommodate displaced residents, while local governments warned that water levels could continue to rise if rainfall persisted. Officials urged residents to avoid flooded areas and respect road closures, emphasizing that even shallow water could conceal dangerous currents and debris. Quebec faced significant flooding along several river systems, particularly in regions prone to spring flooding. Authorities deployed military personnel to assist with sandbagging efforts, reinforcing levees, and helping residents evacuate. Helicopters were used in some areas to assess damage and reach isolated communities cut off by flooded roads. In Manitoba, rivers swelled across agricultural regions, threatening crops and livestock. Farmers rushed to move equipment and animals to higher ground, while provincial officials worked to protect critical infrastructure such as water treatment plants and electrical facilities. The economic impact on agriculture is expected to be substantial, with losses likely extending beyond immediate flood damage to longer-term effects on planting schedules and soil quality. Transportation chaos emerged as one of the most immediate and visible consequences of the flooding. Major highways in both countries were closed after being submerged or undermined by fast-moving water. In some cases, entire sections of roadway collapsed, leaving long day tours and isolating communities. Truck traffic was rerouted for hundreds of miles, disrupting supply chains and delaying deliveries of food, fuel, and medical supplies. Rail networks were also severely affected. Flooded tracks, landslides, and damaged signaling equipment forced freight and passenger rail services to suspend operations in several corridors. Rail companies reported significant delays and cancellations, with ripple effects extending across North America's interconnected logistics systems. Passenger rail operators warned travelers to expect ongoing disruptions as inspections and repairs continued. Air travel was not immune to the chaos. Several airports experienced delays and cancellations due to flooded access roads, ground crew shortages, and weather-related safety concerns. In some cases, aircraft were unable to land or depart as storms reduced visibility and runway conditions deteriorated. Airlines advised passengers to check flight status frequently and allow extra time for travel. Public transit systems in major cities were also hit hard. Flooded subway tunnels, bus depots, and maintenance facilities forced temporary shutdowns and reduced service. Commuters faced long delays as transit agencies worked to pump out water, inspect infrastructure, and restore operations safely. Officials cautioned that full service restoration could take days or even weeks in severely affected areas. Emergency responders worked around the clock to assist residents and mitigate damage. Firefighters, police officers, Coast Guard units, and volunteer rescue teams conducted evacuations, responded to emergency calls, and provided aid to those trapped by rising waters. In several instances, swift water rescue teams were deployed to save individuals who had attempted to drive through flooded roadways and became stranded. Authorities repeatedly emphasized the dangers of floodwaters, warning that moving water as shallow as a few inches can knock a person off their feet, while deeper flows can sweep away vehicles. Officials urged the public to heed evacuation orders and avoid unnecessary travel, stressing that emergency services were already stretched thin. The flooding also raised concerns about water quality and public health. Inundated sewage systems, agricultural runoff, and industrial sites increased the risk of contamination in rivers and drinking water supplies. Local health departments issued boil water advisories in several communities, advising residents to take precautions until water systems could be tested and cleared. Hospitals and healthcare facilities activated emergency protocols to ensure continuity of care. Some facilities relocated patients or reinforced flood defenses to protect critical equipment. Emergency medical services faced challenges reaching patients in flooded areas, prompting coordination with rescue teams and the use of alternative transport methods. Economic impacts from the flooding are expected to be significant. Early estimates suggest billions of dollars in damage to homes, businesses, infrastructure, and agriculture across both countries. Small businesses in flood-affected areas reported closures and inventory losses, while insurers braced for a surge in claims. In agricultural regions, flooding threatens not only current crops but also long-term productivity. Saturated soils can delay planting, increase erosion, and reduce yields. Livestock losses and damage to farm infrastructure add to the financial strain on rural communities already facing volatile markets and rising costs. Energy infrastructure also faced challenges as floodwaters encroached on power plants, substations, and fuel distribution facilities. Utilities shut down power in some areas as a precaution, leaving thousands of customers without electricity. Restoration efforts were complicated by flooded access routes and ongoing safety concerns. Government officials at all levels responded with emergency funding, disaster declarations, and coordination efforts. In the United States, federal agencies worked alongside state and local governments to provide resources, including disaster relief funding, temporary housing assistance, and support for infrastructure repairs. National Guard units were activated in several states to assist with evacuations, logistics, and flood defense operations. In Canada, Federal and provincial governments mobilized resources through emergency management agencies. Financial assistance programs were announced to help affected residents and businesses recover, while military support was deployed to reinforce flood defenses and provide logistical assistance. As waters continued to rise in some regions, officials warned that the situation remained fluid and could worsen if additional rainfall occurred. Meteorologists cautioned that saturated ground conditions meant even moderate rain could trigger further flooding. Forecasts were closely monitored as communities braced for the possibility of renewed evacuations. The flooding reignited broader discussions about infrastructure resilience and climate adaptation. Experts noted that aging drainage systems, levees, and transportation networks are increasingly vulnerable to extreme weather events. Urban development in flood-prone areas has compounded risks, while climate patterns appear to be shifting toward more intense rainfall events. Scientists have long warned that climate change is increasing the frequency and severity of extreme weather, including heavy precipitation and flooding. Warmer air holds more moisture, leading to heavier downpours when storms occur. Combined with rapid snowmelt in northern regions, these factors can overwhelm river systems and infrastructure designed for historical climate norms. Urban planners and policymakers are now facing renewed pressure to invest in flood mitigation measures, such as improved drainage, reinforced levees, natural floodplains, and updated building codes. Some communities have already begun implementing resilience strategies, but the scale of recent flooding underscores the need for broader, coordinated action. Residents affected by the floods described scenes of devastation and uncertainty. Families were forced to leave behind homes, possessions, and pets as evacuation orders came down. Many expressed concern about when they would be able to return and what condition their properties would be in. Community shelters and support centers became hubs of relief and solidarity, providing food, clothing, and emotional support to displaced residents. Volunteers from across affected regions stepped in to assist with sandbagging, cleanup efforts, and donations. As waters begin to recede in some areas, attention will turn to recovery and rebuilding. Damage assessments will guide the allocation of aid, while long-term recovery plans will aim to restore infrastructure and support affected communities. Officials caution that recovery could take months or even years, depending on the extent of damage. Transportation agencies have begun inspecting damaged roads, bridges, and rail lines to determine when services can safely resume. Engineers are assessing structural integrity and prioritizing repairs to critical corridors. Travelers are advised to remain patient and plan for continued disruptions. Environmental impacts are also being evaluated. Floodwaters can alter ecosystems, erode riverbanks, and deposit debris and pollutants across large areas. Wildlife habitats may be disrupted, while fisheries and water quality could be affected in the weeks and months ahead. Despite the challenges, officials emphasize that preparedness and cooperation have saved lives. Early warnings, evacuation orders, and coordinated emergency responses help prevent greater loss of life. Authorities continue to urge residents to stay informed through official channels and follow safety guidance as conditions evolve. The floods serve as a stark reminder of the power of nature and the importance of preparedness in an era of changing climate patterns. As communities across the United States and Canada confront the aftermath, the focus remains on safety, recovery, and resilience. For now, emergency crews remain on high alert, rivers continue to be closely monitored, and millions of people across North America watch anxiously as weather systems move through the region. The coming days will be critical in determining how quickly recovery can begin, and how communities adapt to the growing challenges posed by extreme weather in the years ahead.